Okay, welcome to our class. Let me bring you up to date a little bit on 2 weeks ago. What was happening to me as far as we can tell. I'd never had that experience except one time in my life. A little over 20 years ago, I had determined that I was going to build up to run a marathon. I had just run the fastest Tulsa run I'd run in my life. Our Jason was running cross country for SMU, and he had told me that year, "Dad, I'm going to help you win one of those Francoma mugs," which you have to run the Tulsa run in under 60 minutes. 9.3 miles in under 60 minutes. And I told him there's no way I could do that. And he said, "Oh, yes, you can. You put in the miles, and I'll fly home, and you just hook on to me. I will pull you through." So I had done well. That day, when we passed the first big marker, I had just run the fastest 5,000 meters in my life, and I was nearly 50 years old. And so when we passed the 10,000 meters, it was the fastest 10,000 meters I'd ever run in my life. I mean, I kept saying, I cannot keep up with him, but I was right on his heels, and I did it. I came in under an hour. So I thought, well, by George, I can run a marathon. So I started building up the miles, and finally one Saturday morning I was up to 18 miles, and I went down the river and ran 18 miles. And hurried home and showered and shaved and came down to do a wedding in the chapel at 11 a.m. But I didn't take time to eat anything. And so I was standing in the chapel as the bride and groom came down the aisle, and the room started, going like that. And so just as the bride and groom got to me, I said, "Just hold a second. I need a moment." And I just stepped into the parlor and sat down, put my head down between my knees like I'd been trained in Boy Scouts, Wally, all those years ago. So I put my head down between my knees, and a nurse, an RN, happened to be at the wedding, and she came running in there and said, What's wrong? And I said, I feel faint. She asked, "What have you done this morning?" I said, "I've run 18 miles. "What did you eat?" "I didn't eat." And she said, "Oh, my Lord." So she ran to the Coke machine and brought back a classic Coke. And I drank about half of it, and my head cleared. I went in the chapel, did the wedding. I decided I don't want to run a marathon, so I quit the long distance running. I never tried that again, and I'd never had the problem again, ever. And suddenly last Sunday morning, I'd gotten up even earlier than usual because I wasn't sure 2 weeks ago just what condition the streets were going to be in. Our neighborhood was still pretty lousy, and if I was going to have any trouble getting to work or not. So I had left earlier than usual, and that morning I looked at a banana in the fruit bowl there, and I thought, gee, I just can't get that down. I mean, my stomach's always fluttery on Sunday morning. I'm not hungry. I don't want to eat, and so I didn't. And then suddenly, the first service went fine. 3/4 of the Sunday school lesson went fine, and then suddenly I'm looking at all of you, and the room starts swimming. So thanks to Dr. Spencer Brown, he came to my aid immediately and spotted the problem and got a couple of glasses of orange juice down me, and I was fine. The 11 o'clock service went fine, and I've had no problem since. So I'm trying to be more careful. This morning, I tried to be more careful to get, choke something down before I came on to church. So, Dr. Brown, thank you so very much for rushing to my aid and seeing that I was fine, and I was fine. Okay. Yeah. Well, thanks. Gail was home sick. She had been battling a terrible cold. And so when they got me to the sacristy and I saw Trey there, I said, "Trey, call your mother before somebody calls her and scares her to death, Call your mother and tell her that I'm fine." So he did. He did, and it worked. So,
not a whole row, and on him.
Yeah, if you couldn't hear what she was saying was, of course, 2 weeks ago we'd had the huge snowstorm, and she thought the camera people did a really good job of holding the focus in tight so that they were showing full pews, and that was really, really helpful. So anyway, I've had no recurring problems at all, none. And we had a good trip to Israel. We had a couple of incidents. One of our women lost a passport. She still believes the young men sitting next to her stole her passport. But anyway, that we had to help her get a new passport at the U.S. Embassy in Jerusalem. We had one woman that twisted an ankle at Megiddo and had to have ice on it. But the next morning was much better. And then, unfortunately, we got to Tiberias the very second night, and the bus was unloaded. All the luggage was put on the curb there at the hotel. It was just after dark, because the days are short there in February. It's actually north of Tulsa. And so we'd gotten to the hotel just after dark that day. We had a very long, busy day. And the bus pulled away to the parking lot. And I had collected at the desk all of our room keys, and each envelope had in it a couple of stickers with the room number already on it. So all the people had to do is I gave them their ticket, room keys was, take the little stickers out, put them on the luggage, and the bellhops were going to bring them right on up. Somehow, Joanne Bland stepped off of about a 6-inch curb that was there where the bus had gone, and trying to put the sticker on the luggage, stepped off and broke her arm very badly. You could tell immediately it was badly broken. Dr. Brown, I thought, well, at least she's in Israel. She's got a shot here with these doctors. And so we called an ambulance, and the guide said she would go along for any translation problems at all. And the next morning when she was reporting, the guide was reporting to all of us at breakfast, she kept saying, this Russian. And I could see that my people were thinking, Russian communist. And I was saying, no, Russian Jew. A Russian Jewish doctor who finally had gotten out of the Soviet Union when Jews could get out was the one. But it ended up that it was badly broken. They had to do surgery and put wires in it with a contraption on. She spent 5 nights in the hospital there in Tiberias, and then she and Wayne came on to Jerusalem and met us there. But what a trooper. They got to Jerusalem, and the next morning she was at breakfast and ready to go. And she didn't miss a step the rest of the way, and flew home with us all on Thursday evening. So that worked out fine. We're grateful. And Dr. John Phillips was with us, he and Jane, and he had already called the Tulsa Bone and Joint and lined her up an appointment Friday morning. We got in Thursday night about 10 o'clock, had arranged for her to see one of our local orthopedic surgeons Friday morning to be sure that she was doing fine and that everything was going well. So other than that, it was fine. Some of you have been to Israel. I had not been in 14 years. Let me just comment briefly about it. First of all, the Israelis are still doing wonderfully well with their reforestation. They're still planting trees like crazy, and they're gradually moving the forest farther and farther south. So that's great. We had never seen Israel in the rain before. And almost every morning we woke up and the streets were wet. They'd had a nice shower during the night. We got caught in rain a couple of times. When we got down to the Jordan River to remember our baptism, it was raining harder than at any other time. And I'd told the group, we don't rebaptize in the Methodist Church, but we're going to sing a couple of hymns. Gail and I had prepared some hymn booklets, and we're going to sing a couple of hymns here, and then we'll have a prayer, and you can scoop your hand in the waters of the Jordan and touch your own forehead if you want to, and remember your baptism. And Lord, it was pouring down rain. We're standing under umbrellas and the water is just coming down, and we're singing, "Shall we gather at the river?" And you didn't have to dip your hand in the river, just move your umbrella a minute, And while we were down there, it also, thunder went, and I just knew we were all going to get electrocuted down there with our umbrellas. But it was wonderful to see Israel at 52 degrees, 53 degrees. That was wonderful to get to see Masada and need a jacket because it's usually 115 degrees. Our guide told us that one time last August she was down at Masada when it was 52 degrees Celsius. That's about 124. About 124 degrees. Yeah, that's right. That's the way I remember Masada too. Most dramatic changes that Gail and I observed and talked about, the community of Sepphoris. 14 years ago, they had just begun the digs at Sepphoris. You don't find that name in the Bible, but there was a rather large Greek and Roman city just outside Nazareth. Nazareth, we know, was a little village of about 300 or 400, no more, about 300 people. And when Herod the Great had died, there'd been an insurrection at Sepphoris, and so the Romans had burned it to the ground. That meant it needed to be rebuilt. And scholars believe that Joseph and Jesus would have found work in Sepphoris, that they would have walked that 3 miles every day where there was a lot of work in rebuilding that community. And when we were there, again, 14 years ago, they had started digging and had unearthed a couple of houses, and you could see some beautiful mosaics. But now, we were there 2.5 hours, and you could have been there 5 hours easily. And Gail was remarking there was one woman's face in one of those mosaics. It was just beautiful, really, really beautiful. But now they have acres and acres unearthed. It's just amazing. Dramatic improvements in the digs at Bet-Shean. Every time we've been, they've just done so much more work at Bet-Shean. You recall it's where King Saul and all of his sons were killed on Mount Gilboa, which is just immediately west of Bet-Shean. And then their bodies were nailed to the wall at Bet-Shean, and what the Philistines did to them. But the city continued and did wonderfully well for a long time, even during the Roman occupation. The Romans had brought in magnificent marble columns, as they often did. Those of you who've seen Ephesus and other ruins where the Romans have been. And they usually established major cross streets in the downtown, north, south, and east, west. And they called those streets the Cardo or the Cardia, the heart of the city. And so in Bet-Shean, you had these magnificent white marble columns. I mean, you couldn't reach around them at the base, running east, west, and north, south. Now, what they've done is they decided, the archaeologists who were digging there, that they would re-erect about 80% of what they were finding. I mean, they literally stood all these columns and poles back up, and the amphitheater was largely unscathed. So it covers acres of ground. But the other 20% they decided to leave so you could tell what ultimately destroyed Bet-Shean. It was a huge earthquake. So here you have the north-south Cardia that's been largely re-erected. These magnificent white columns have been stood up again, and you can easily walk right down this main street. But then a part of the east-west Cardia, they've left just as they have been digging around it. I mean, with toothbrushes and things, that meticulously they've been cleaning. And here again, these huge marble columns just tumbled and twisted by that earthquake. Huge earthquake. And our guide was very articulate in pointing out why that the European plate, the Asian plate, the African plate come together there and have forced downward the Jordan River Valley. So that from the Lake of Galilee to the Jordan, down the Jordan to the Dead Sea, you have the lowest spots on the planet Earth. Literally, about 1,700 feet below sea level. And then, of course, Jerusalem is about 3,700 feet up in the hills. So you go over a mile in a 17-mile stretch there. The Dead Sea is continuing to retreat, to go down, because the Jews are using more and more of the waters of the lake of Galilee and using the river itself for irrigation. All the way down the river, you have just thousands of acres of farmland. And the Israelis are very successfully farming and selling a lot of fresh produce to Western Europe. So they're very successful farmers where they have water. But they'd had about 3 or 4 dry years, drier than usual. And so the lake is down too, the Sea of Galilee. That freshwater lake is down about 12 feet. And that translates into several hundred yards of coastline all the way around and so on. So the ruins at Bet-Shean, the ruins at Sepphoris, I thought what they had unearthed, that both of those were really dramatic. They're still digging, of course, in the city of Jerusalem itself and gradually unearthing a little bit more. I thought it interesting that they have a scale model of Jerusalem. They call it the Jerusalem of Herod the Great, but of course that means the Jerusalem of Jesus' time as well. And it was sort of on the outskirts of Jerusalem at a major hotel site, a convention site. But that land was being reclaimed for other purposes, and so they moved this entire scale model right into the heart of the city, near the museum of the Dead Sea Scrolls. And they have the Israeli Museum there as well. We found this interesting. When we were going into that museum where the scale model was, there was a beautiful plaque of donors to the museum. And it said, those who give at least $100,000 a year to the museum. Schusterman Foundation, Tulsa, Oklahoma. Right there. So the only one from our state on that plaque, but Lynn Schusterman and the Schusterman Foundation, more than $100,000 a year to that museum. So it really is a wonderful place. Those of you who've been to Jerusalem and have seen Yad Vashem, the Holocaust memorial, it has been torn to the ground and completely rebuilt. Rebuilt. And it's magnificent. The new one is a great improvement over the old one. It really is.
They still have the mirrors?
They do. The Children's Museum that the Spiegel family built is still there and it is effective as ever. You may recall that the famous Spiegel family in America, Spiegel catalogs and so on, when that family was taken to Auschwitz, children under 10 were generally taken immediately to the gas chambers and the ovens. And the Spiegels had a little boy, 3 years old. And when they arrived at the Judenrampe at Birkenau, this 3-year-old was manually taken from their arms to the gas chambers and then the ovens. And the mother and father, being young adults, were pointed to the work details and survived. The mother and father survived, but this 3-year-old little boy, of course, they never, ever forgot. And when you walk in, it's built in the side of a hill, like a cave, the Spiegel part. And as you start in, just growing out of the stone wall there is the precious face of this 3-year-old child. So that's what you see first, this little boy of theirs. Eventually they got to come to America, and they made a lot of money here. But Anyway, this precious little boy's face is there just as you go in. And then you've been told, just place your hand on the handrail and go quietly. So it gets darker and darker until you're in total darkness, and the only sound you hear is the reading of the names. 1.5 million of the Jews who were killed in the Holocaust were under 10. 1.5 million, including their little 3-year-old, the Spiegels. And so this museum is designed just to read the names, and when they get through 1.5 million, it starts over. They read the name, the age, and the hometown of every child. Name, age, and hometown. And you just slide your hand along the handrail in the darkness, and then you round a little corner and discover there's one candle, and there are thousands of mirrors. Thousands of mirrors. One little light just reflected again and again and again and again through all these mirrors. And then you go out the other side. It's really, really something. The new museum, Yad Vashem, is built like the blade of a knife. This horrible knife that came down on on the Jews through the Nazi regime. And it's built with a lot of glass running all along that knife blade, if you would. So just the sunlight makes it very bright from one end to the other. But as you enter, you discover that your path doesn't go straight down the knife blade. It zigzags in and out of darkness. So you move left, and it's 1933, and you move back across the blade of light, and it's 1934, 1935, 1936, 1937, all the way to 1945. And in the older museum, almost everything was newspaper clippings, as you recall. So you had the same years, but you had to do a lot of reading to see what happened in 33, 34. Well, of course, now they've got the latest technology. And Steven Spielberg Foundation and others have interviewed Holocaust survivors just all over the world where they can find them. So in 1933, as you see what the Nazis first began to do, you have screens and faces and people saying, I was there on that day when this happened. I was there. I remember this. I remember. And as you move year by year, you have a lot more people, faces, voices telling you the story. So they still have newspapers and those sort of things, but it's a lot more interactive. Well, not interactive so much. You're not actually pushing buttons and things. I just mean you're seeing real people who are telling their stories and what happened there. And books that I've read in Jewish Christian Dialogue Group all these years made it very interesting. Gail and I have seen a lot of that in the 8 camps we've been to. We've visited 8, as you know. And at each of those now, and all of them in Germany are free. The state keeps them up now. They're all free. If you want the audio sets, there's a charge of that, 4 or 5 euros, as I recall. But you can get in at no cost at all in all the different camps. So Gail and I had seen a lot of those kinds of people, faces, heard their stories, but this new museum is wonderfully done. It really is. So they've made great improvements. Even though the old one was very impressive, the new one is even more impressive. So Yad Vashem, a definite change there. One thing that we had seen on OETA, Gail and I one night several months ago, was that in Nazareth, a group has started a little village trying to recreate a village similar to the one where Jesus would have grown up. When you go to Nazareth today, you discover it's a city of 75,000, and it's crowded, and it's dirty, it's noisy. it's Palestinian. And the kids there have attitude. Gail and I commented, the guide wanted us to sit right behind the driver so she could converse with us as we went along. Do we have time for this? Do we need how long do you want to stay here? That sort of thing. So we could see, and these teenage Palestinian kids, walk out right in front of the Jewish buses and, do all this sort of stuff. Let me give you a quote. Golda Meir said one time, all those years ago, the Palestinians will make no progress until they love their children more than they hate us Jews. And they're not there. Their children are being taught hatred. You can see it in their eyes. The Israelis are doing wonders. Wonders. When you go into Jerusalem now has more than 1 million people. Tel Aviv has more than 1 million. Haifa has more than 1 million. There are now 7 million in Israel, and 5.5 million of them are Jews. They have their own Silicon Valley there. You can see huge buildings of Cisco and Microsoft and Oracle and so on. One of the largest generic drug makers in the world is in Israel, Teva. I don't know, you investors may be familiar with TEVA. Teva is one of the biggest generic pharmaceutical producers in the world. Down at the Dead Sea, they have a company that's making all kinds of cosmetics out of the mineral deposits there. They're finding all kinds of minerals, trace elements in that water, and they're harvesting. And there's a company called Ahava, A-H-A-V-A, Ahava, and they sell these skin softeners and so on. They say if we can survive 115 degrees at Masada, this cream is good for your skin as well. We went to that little plant one day and let people sort of see what was going on there, just about 30 minutes of our day for a little coffee break and bathroom break as well. But anyway, at Nazareth, if you just go into the city, the Christians virtually have all been run out of Nazareth. It's a Palestinian Muslim city. And the Catholics have a big church there, but usually those churches don't look anything like you're in my experience. So when we saw on OETA that somebody has built a new little village trying to capture what Nazareth looked like when Jesus was a boy, I asked Lisa White to book us into that. And I hoped it was as good as advertised. When we were going into Nazareth just to eat lunch, it took us an hour, just traffic light by traffic light, these kids, walking through the middle of traffic and so on. It was terrible. We had lunch in a beautiful building that was a Christian monastery. The Christians gave up and left. It's now a restaurant. So that was what our people were seeing of Nazareth. Horns, honking, dirt, filth, attitude. And then we pulled into the parking lot, and a young woman from the United States, early 20s, I would guess, college-age student looked like, was our guide to walk us through this little village of Jesus' life. And what we had heard was that it's sort of a Williamsburg, Virginia kind of place. And it is. They still need to keep adding, but it was very interesting. They were telling us that to terrace a little piece of land in Nazareth would have taken a family of 6 a year to terrace a fourth of an acre. Collect the rocks. There are rocks everywhere, and put the rocks in appropriate places to build little terraces and so on. And we got in, and here was a little herd of goats, and the shepherd was saying nothing. He was tending goats. It was interesting that these goats were not afraid of any of us, they and the sheep, and they were just, pushing their way through our little group. And one of the old goats reared up and started chewing on one of the olive trees. And it was interesting. This shepherd was an older man, and he picked up a tiny little pebble. I was watching him, and he tossed it and sort of hit the goat And he got down out of that tree, quit eating off that olive tree. And of course, it was a shepherd throwing a little rock in a cave trying to get his old goat to come out that first broke the clay pot holding the Dead Sea Scrolls. You remember, that's how they were first discovered. I'd been trying to tell our people dramatically about how Jesus came into Jerusalem riding down this windy road on a burro, and Pontius Pilate, we'd been to Caesarea, and here was Pontius Pilate with this snorting steed and these centurions with their hundreds of soldiers each, tromping into the city of Jerusalem from the west, Jesus coming from the east. Well, guess what? In the little village, there was a little Jenny, and she had a little colt. And he had his little winter coat on. He looked like a little teddy bear. And he loved people. I mean, he'd just walk over to people and lean his head up against them if they would, rub him a little bit. The cutest little burro. He was so tiny. And they showed us an olive press and how that worked, and a wine press, and how people tramped out the grapes with their feet, and showed us that. And then we went into a little shop, and there was a carpenter, stonemason, like Joseph and Jesus probably were. And then in another shop, there was an older woman teaching a younger woman how to handle the wool from the very first spinning and then to the weaving itself and carding the wool and so on. So it was wonderful. You could shut out this big noisy city and be a part of a little village, probably very much like the one where Jesus lived. So that was, I found interesting. I think our group did as well. Israelis eat the Mediterranean diet. It's a little unusual for us to walk into a breakfast buffet and 2/3 of it are bell peppers and olives, about 5 big dishes of fish every morning. I didn't see any of our group eating fish at 6 a.m., but pickled and salted and smoked fish of different kinds. I found pancakes and maple syrup I liked a lot better. Good yogurt with fruit in it. That was good as well. We SMU Mustang fans had a treat. We walked into the hotel dining room that first night in Tiberias. Here was a big tall guy walking into the room with an SMU jersey on, and it was our football coach, June Jones, and his wife, and a couple of his assistant coaches with SMU jerseys on. And we went over and introduced ourselves to him, and, genuflected, told him how glad we were. He had brought our Mustangs back, from the brink of doom, and had actually gotten us into 2 bowl games. He was very, very nice. Our little Abby had gone with us, and she managed to get a picture of her and Coach Jones to her 2 little brothers in Tulsa, that she had seen Coach Jones, and got to have a picture made with him. And I told him when I introduced Abby to him that her daddy had taken all of them down to the bowl game in December to watch them play Army. So anyway, that was sort of a treat. His group was, he was with the Methodist Church in Dallas, and they were at Tiberias 3 nights just like we were. So
was he recruiting?
He wasn't recruiting, I don't think. I don't think the Israeli kids know football from anything, He's looking for big, ugly guys, I hope, We need some big, old ugly guys to come play for us. Any questions about anything, Ellis? Yeah.
Tell me, was there indication of any impact of what was going on in Egypt while you were there?
Answer, no. There was nothing going on in Israel. I mean, people were watching the television for sure. They were watching the television, and our guide would, have brief comments about it when people asked her, but there were no incidents at all. Let me tell you one other thing. I know that the United Nations and our friend Hillary are constantly telling the Jews to take down the wall they put up. But since they put up the wall 5 years ago, they have had 0 suicide bombers in Israel. 0. How effective is the wall? I don't think they're about to take it down. We were not allowed to go into Jericho. They were afraid to take us into Jericho. It's part of the West Bank and controlled by Palestinians. We were allowed to go to Bethlehem, but our guide was not allowed to go in. She was a Jew, and Palestinians would not let her in. So we had to go in without her. Anybody can get into Bethlehem. It took us an hour to get through the wall coming out of Bethlehem because the Israelis were checking under the buses and all for possible bombs and so on. But it's worked. They've had no suicide bombings, zero, since the wall went up. So it's worked for them. It's a shame. It's a shame that the Palestinians are not doing well. Not doing well. And the Israelis are doing really well. They work hard. They go to school. And our guide, this was interesting. I didn't know who our guide was going to be, and she met us at the airport. And she was a Spaniard from Madrid who decided, a Jew, who decided 25 years ago she wanted to go to Israel. She was a young woman, college age, a Sephardic Jew from Spain. She went to Israel, met a young man, an Australian Jew, and fell in love with him, and they got married and had 2 children. And she said, he decided he wanted to go back to Australia and chase kangaroos and koalas. That's the way she said it. So she's been a single mom all these years since. She has the 2 children. Son's 22 now, daughter's 20. And she's very proud of them. But it was interesting to hear someone speaking English and Hebrew with a very Spanish accent. She looked like she had come from Mexico, she talked like this when she talked. But she was really good, very, very capable, and a woman who really gave us her best shot. Our driver, she lived in Jerusalem. Her home was in Jerusalem, so the 5 nights we were there, she slept at her apartment with her daughter every night. Our driver was from Tel Aviv. We had 1 night in Tel Aviv, then 3 nights in Tiberias. And when we got to Jerusalem, Gail and I were sitting right behind him. And so as we pulled into the Renaissance Hotel there in Jerusalem, he said to me, "That's my motorcycle right there." I thought he was pulling my leg. I said, "Yeah, of course it is." "No," he said, "I'm going home tonight to Tel Aviv." And so the bags were all taken off the bus. He parked it, got on the motorcycle, and rode away. And he's in his 60s. He's not a kid. But the next morning, it was pouring down rain. And I said, "How was the ride in?" Because it's an hour to Tel Aviv. And he said, "Well, it was wet. And it was cold. But it was worth it. I went to Tel Aviv to see my 4-year-old grandchild in a tutu in a ballet." And at one point, we were looking down over Jericho because we couldn't go in. We went up. He knew a place. The guide knew a place. It was a compound with 2 electrified fences around it, and buses could pull in up there and look down over Jericho. And here's part of the story. Well, Gail wasn't feeling so well. She'd been battling this cold and stuff, and we've seen Jericho. So she didn't get off the bus there for the few minutes we were there. And she said suddenly, the drivers don't say much. The guides do all the talking. And so the driver was, she was just visiting with him. And he just told her that his mother was not a warm, affectionate person. And his father of a generation, he was born right there in Israel, not warm, not affectionate. But he had decided, I will be a father and a grandfather who's present. And he rode a motorcycle 5 nights from Jerusalem to Tel Aviv to be with his family. Get back the next morning while we were having breakfast, ready to drive for us again, to be with his family. And he was so proud of this little 4-year-old that had been in the ballet. And, it's wonderful because you don't have to act like your parents. You can do it better. You can do it better. You can be more effective than your parents were if you dedicate yourself to it. And he was a wonderful example of that. I felt it was really, we were proud of him. We were proud of him that he was trying so hard to be a good father and a grandfather. He had 5 and expecting their 6th grandchild. So I told him, well, he's about to catch up with the Biggses here. One more and he'd be up with the Biggses. So, yes?
Was there a sense of tension around Israel regarding Egypt? I mean, you said that you felt safe, so but was there an overall sense of apprehension?
We were not aware of any particular tension in Israel over the situation in Egypt. Of course, you don't have much contact with other Jews. You're spending all your time with your driver and your guide. And when people would ask her about it, she would respond briefly. But she knew that we really had come to Israel for it being the Holy Land for us. And so she didn't dwell on any of that. They're concerned. They are concerned. Egypt has been their biggest. They've had the longest peace treaty with Egypt of any other Middle Eastern country, and Egypt, of course, is by far the biggest of the Arab countries. It has by far more Arabs than any other country in the Middle East, so it's big and strong. The one thing that may make a huge difference in Egypt, of course, is that they have no oil. Egypt has no oil, so they are primarily dependent upon American and Western European tourism. And if Americans and Western Europeans are afraid to go to Egypt, their economy tanks, for sure. So how much that will play, and of course if they get some idiot, if they should go the direction Iran did, then some Ayatollah won't care whether they have tourism or not. So they may cut off their nose to spite their face. I don't know for sure. And Israel doesn't know for sure. They're concerned. But as far as feeling the tension in the hotels and so, no, everybody seemed to be going about their business as much as they could. Yes, sir. The Temple Mount, of course, is controlled by the Palestinians. It doesn't, when I say controlled, I mean they're there and have a strong presence. Israeli soldiers are all around the Temple Mount to be sure that you're safe. And I didn't feel unsafe. What is interesting, our guide had already warned us. She said they won't give us any trouble when we are near the El Aqsa Mosque or the Dome of the Rock. However, the one big thing that's changed there is that we're no longer allowed in those 2 buildings. On our prior visits we were, not now. Christians are not allowed in either of those buildings now. So we were just, walked around the Temple Mount, and she was describing to us more from the model we'd seen the day before. This is where the second temple stood. This was the court of the Gentiles and the court of the women and so on. But she told us that she was going to take us to the east gates, which the Muslims sealed up 1,400 years ago, because they'd heard that the Jewish Messiah would come from the east and the Christian Messiah would return from the east. So in their minds, if they sealed up the east gates, then the Jewish Messiah and the Christian Messiah couldn't come. So they've sealed them up, and they've been sealed up all these years. Well, we had seen those gates from the Mount of Olives, and now we were going to see those sealed up gates from inside the Temple Mount. And she said, there's one guy with a big, big voice, and he will scream at us when we go to the east gates. He doesn't want us thinking about Messiah. And so he will scream at us, but, just keep walking. Everything's okay. So surely enough, we got off the Temple Mount, down a tier or 2, and to the east gates. And suddenly this big male voice, he was in a little clump of trees, was screaming at us in Arabic. So we didn't know what he was saying, but he was screaming in Arabic. What she pointed out, and all of us could see, is that on that one part of the Temple Mount, there was more trash than any other. I mean, just potato chip bags and things, empty sacks and bags and bottles and stuff. And she said it's quite on purpose that they allow that area right in front of the two east gates that they sealed up, through which Messiah is supposed to come, that they make it the junkiest on the Temple Mount by design. They will not make progress till they love their children more than they hate us. I just think that's a terrific line. And the Palestinians aren't there yet. They hate Jews more than anything. They teach little children to, your supreme goal in life is to find a way to kill a Jew. And it's tragic. And you and I hear about these matters like the Oslo Accord. You should take a look at the map that got drawn at the Oslo Accords. It's unbelievable. I mean, here is such a tiny little country to start with, and they carved out a hole. It looks like you took a cookie cutter and cut out 4 holes right down in the middle of Israel and said, let the Palestinians run these. And that's the kind of stuff the United Nations does. It's just unconscionable that they imagine you can govern something like that when you've got a tiny little country that's 50 miles wide and about 250 miles long, and you donut hole cut out 4 different areas and tell the Palestinians you can run these with the kind of feelings that they have toward each other. And Ahmadinejad and all those guys, they say every day nearly if they could run the Jews into the Mediterranean and kill them all, they talk about finishing the job that Hitler began and that sort of thing. So they're under constant threat, and they understand that. And our guide said to one of our people, I heard her say at one point, every day for 22 years, I sent my little boy out and knew that there were people living close by who wanted to kill him. And my little girl, and even today, school children are not allowed to leave the school at any time without somebody with an automatic weapon accompanying them. So
does that still prevail?
It does. She said that.
I remember that. We're always
children
with armed individuals.
She said that still is the rule in all the schools, that if children take any field trip whatsoever, they must be accompanied by a proper adult with an automatic weapon. So they're still very, very frightened about that. But it's amazing, still with all of that going on, how upbeat the people seem to be, and they're going on with business and it's an amazing country. It really is an amazing country. And I think you would be impressed.
One of the things we noticed was the tremendous difference between the atmosphere and the situation that exists in each camp. I mean, it's astounding.
Yes.
I mean, how good it is versus how bad it is.
Yeah, exactly. And of course, when finally they got the Democratic vote for the Gaza Strip, they elected Hamas to lead the So go figure. It's just amazing. There's so much. And look at Jericho today. I mean, every time we had been into Jericho, we had a bus of 40, 45 people, and if they just buy an ice cream cone and a Coke or a cup of coffee or whatever, that's 40 people times whatever that was. And now there are no buses of Christians going into Jericho. Zero. And I mean, there are many, many buses of Christians all the time, everywhere we went. I mean, the parking lot at Capernaum is full. The parking lots, at all these places went full of Christian tourists in the middle of February. They're not going into Jericho, and they're frightened to death to go into Bethlehem. So it's tough. Lisa Whited from our church handled everything for us. Lisa prefers working through a company out of California called Friendship Tours. The man who's president of the company is a man from India. He's a Christian from India named Nasser Nayuri. I don't know him. Lisa's worked with him for 25 years or so. In Israel, they speak very highly of him. The Jews do. The guides said, please, if you liked my work, please tell Mr. Nayuri. The driver told me when I was giving him the tips the morning we left, he said, if I did okay, I would really appreciate if you would tell Mr. Nayuri, that you liked me. I would love to drive for him even more than I do, and so on. So they're working hard and trying to support their families like everybody else. It's an amazing country with a very upbeat attitude generally. I think they just are extra cautious when you go in through security. And by the way, the airport in Tel Aviv is all brand new since we were there. Completely new airport in Tel Aviv. I didn't recognize it at all. The older one is now used for short little flights up to Haifa or down to Eilat or Sharm el-Sheikh, something like that. The big international flights go out of an all new airport. It's really amazing. But we were screened before we got on the plane in Tel Aviv. And the same in Newark when we were going out. Was after we'd been through all the security that Tulsa had and the security that Newark had, the Israelis had set up one more checkpoint where their people wand all of us, between your legs and all around and so on, one more time before you got on the plane. But they're the best in the world. They've had the greatest track record of any in the world of apprehending terrorists before they get on their airplanes. So they try. One thing that's new in Jerusalem, they have light rail now. Completely across town. It runs completely across town. It's a light rail system, and they're trying it. Some of the old traditionalists, the Hasidim, are against anything modern. But it went through, and it's only been up and operating about 6 months. But it looked like a lot of people were using it. Very nice little trains, running across the city. Not in the old walled portion, of course. No room there, but the major part of the city, it was. The little light rail was running very well. So, anything else that I could tell you about? All right. Well, it was an interesting trip. I yield to the rest of you at this point. I think I'm never going back again, probably. I've been there and done that, and I think that'll do it for me. And we're unanimous in that, right? We're unanimous in that at this point. You know how these long flights can be. Going over, we had a tailwind. Newark to Tel Aviv, 9.5 hours. Coming back, we had a headwind. Tel Aviv to Newark, 12 hours. Instead of 9.5, 12. The one redeeming thing now is that even though we were sitting, way back in the back end of the plane, we didn't have business class or first class, anything like that. Everybody has their own little screen now, and you just, touch. And Gail said she watched 5 movies coming back. And I had missed Secretariat. I didn't see Secretariat. That was terrific. I remember when Secretariat was running in 1973, but I'd forgotten how terrific that horse was. That was a good movie. I watched an old movie I'd not seen in years, Babette's Feast. Somebody remember? What a great movie still. And Babette's Feast, it's about a little... I believe the woman wrote... Wasn't it Isaac Dennison who wrote that story? Mayor Wheeler, I think. Dr. Spencer, does that sound right? I think Isaac Dennison wrote that, who also wrote Out of Africa. I think that's the same author, but she was from Scandinavia, and it's a story about a little village that's had an old pastor they've loved very much, and he's died, and now everybody in the little village is nearing death. They're all aged folk, and they practice piety, sickening piety every day. And here's this woman who's come into their community named Babette, and she wins the lottery back in France, not millions, but several thousand francs, and she decides to put on a dinner for these people. She was the famous chef in a restaurant in Paris. And she decides to spend her lottery money and prepare a dinner. And of course, the whole image is of what table fellowship really means and what it is to celebrate life beyond salted cod. They eat salted cod 365 days a year. And she prepares this wonderful gourmet French meal for them. So it was really, really great. At one point I decided, well, I'm going to read for a while now. So you push up music and you get everybody from Willie Nelson and back again. But here was classical. And when I pushed up classical, one of the about eight options, I guess there, was John Rutter's Requiem. And so I said, yes, and I started reading, and I turned on John Rutter's Requiem and listened to it all the way through, start to finish, which our church has done before, and it was really terrific. So that makes it possible, to fly, but it's 12 hours is a long time on one plane. It's a long time. So, as you know, when they get you up in Jerusalem and you have to go to the airport, and they want you there 3 hours early, Israeli security does. So it meant when I was brushing my teeth in Tulsa, I'd been up 26 hours. That's a long time. That's a really long time. But anyway, it all went well except for a couple of our folks, and we were really sorry. But Joanne was a trooper. She did terrifically well with such courage and great attitude. Really wonderful. We were all impressed and inspired by her. Okay. I know last Sunday we left off in the book of Daniel. I had just another chapter or so that I wanted to deal with you on Daniel, and we will. And then we'll move right on to these lesser prophets. And again, it doesn't mean their messages are unimportant. It means we don't have as much of their work as we do the major ones. So after Daniel comes Hosea and Joel and Amos and so on. And we'll move through those fairly quickly. If you haven't been to church yet, let me encourage you to hear Dr. Robert Long. If you hear him once, you will want to hear him all 3 nights as well. Bob is genuine. I've known him since he was 13 years old. When I became the Sunday night preacher at First Methodist Houston, he and Marcia were girlfriend, boyfriend in the 7th grade, never dated anybody else, married each other, have 2 children, 4 grandchildren. Gail's going to run over to the hotel and pick Marcia up now for the 11 o'clock service. But they are just terrific, wonderful people, and Bob's a really gifted preacher. So if you haven't been to church yet, be sure to stick around for 11 o'clock.